of the PHTC.
Thank you, Joanna. So again, it gives me very briefly, since I did a full introduction of Dr. Schmalzried during our first webinar, suffice it to say that he's a professor of public health and chair of the Department of Public Health and Allied Health at Bowling Green State University. And he's a former health commissioner for 17 years and is a registered sanitarian in the state of Ohio for over 20 years. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And Hans, I'll turn the presentation over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to my presentation about succession planning for local health agencies. My first session on succession planning focused on why we should do it, and we discussed some of the triggers that motivate organizations to do it. During this session, I'm going to talk more about how it's done. So just a quick review. During my last session, I covered some main points, and this is just a quick review for those to catch some of you up that maybe weren't able to join us the last time. First of all, it's important to develop an effective succession plan sooner rather than later, because without an effective plan, alongside with all the increased retirements, local health departments are very likely to face leadership deficits. And I think one consequence of this may eventually lead to an urgency to select and develop people and other develop managers and other key positions, and you'll have a smaller pool of applicants and obviously steeper learning curves. We also talked about barriers to developing and implementing an effective succession plan, and these barriers include maybe low priority from top management, not enough resources for development and implementation, at least people thinking there's not enough, and maybe lack of understanding about how to measure the benefits, and then some of the other issues, governance kind of things like collective bargaining and civil service issues. So, and the other point we talked about, the succession of senior management, like your health commissioner director, is the focus of the significant portion of research on succession planning. However, from the evaluations, you all indicated to me that you're more interested in developing succession plans that identify other positions of your local health department. And the other final thing is, in order to be successful, you really need someone as a champion to lead the effort, someone with passion and drive. So that's just a quick review. And like I mentioned a moment ago, in my first presentation, my focus was more on succession planning of your top administrator, your local health department. And this is where I've done most of my work, and most of the research is focused on. One question that was posed in the evaluations was whether there was a list of government organizations that practice succession planning, and that list organizations that practice succession planning, and how effective those organizations are compared to those that don't. But like I mentioned, succession planning has only in the past several years even made it on local health department radar screens, and many local health departments have expressed interest in succession planning, but there's really no data tracking this, and unfortunately I don't think a whole lot's been done in this area among local health departments. However, I think with the accreditation process and the whole issue of Domain 8, which focuses on workforce development, will probably change some of that, since succession planning is actually a subset of workforce development. Also, I've tried to gear this presentation more towards drilling down deeper into your local health department. So, for example, questions like who will move into this EPI position when Lisa retires, or Dave could move into any one of these two director positions if he accepts one, but for female and minority employees in key positions. These are the kind of things that you were indicating you wanted to hear more about, drilling down deeper in the organizations as opposed to just hearing about how your top leader or top administrator how that succession plan will be developed for them. So here's my objectives. Again, I appreciate all the comments and suggestions from the participants from the first session. And so what we're going to do here is try, at the end, I hope that you'll have learned how the scope of succession planning can be determined, and I hope that you'll have a basic understanding about what gap analysis is, and I hope that you'll have learned some tools that are used for succession planning. I hope that you'll know more about some of the essential components needed to design a succession plan. And I'd also like to take a little time to revisit our discussion about succession planning and civil service and collective bargaining challenges, because I think my remarks about this were not very encouraging, and I apologize for that during our last session. And I was pleased to read in the evaluation that at least someone challenged me to provide some possible workable solutions to this issue. So getting started, there are many different approaches to succession planning, which again vary depending on local health department needs and size, and the legal and the fiscal obstacles, and other HR preferences. And again, like I said before, there's no one size fits all local health departments. And because of this, the information I'm going to be providing you today should be looked at more as a guide than as a clear step-by-step process. So in order to get a start on the right foot, everyone needs to be on the same page, and it's important for top administration to clearly define your purpose for succession planning, and determining the goal of your succession plan can be a fairly simple, actually, but important process or important step. So defining clear expectations and parameters up front can certainly increase the likelihood that you're going to get more support in the end, and you'll have some measurable results. And even though it does take a few years before you'll be able to actually experience the benefits and see some of the impacts. So also for some of you, I think you might want to keep the process small and manageable at first, because this can increase your likelihood of a long-term success. So a pilot program that maybe focuses on a limited number of critical positions that you can produce some good results can help build support for the future expansion of the program. So at every level of your local health department, there are people who play important roles in your succession planning efforts. The board should ensure that there's a process in effect. Your health commissioner director, in my opinion, is personally responsible for ensuring that plan exists. Senior managers should be responsible for establishing talent development in their divisions. HR is important for helping generate and analyzing employee data. Your department managers are really out there. They should be helping to identify and develop your talent, and they should also be looking at the best people to groom talent to help meet future requirements in the departments. And I think one thing sometimes we forget about is the individual. This is something I learned recently working with the local health department. They should know what they want out of life in their professions, and they're the ones ultimately responsible for developing themselves in the future. So let's not forget the individual's responsibility. This slide steps include forming a team, aligning your project with your strategic plan, developing or determining the scope of your plan, predicting your future workforce needs, analyzing your workforce supply, looking at the gap, determine the gap between supply and needs, creating an action plan, and then also, like everything we do, having an evaluation process. So it's important for me to emphasize, again, that every agency will go about this process in a little different manner. And there probably won't be two local health departments with the same succession plan. So setting up the team. One of the first priorities in preparation for succession planning is creating a team. And the group will essentially determine the scope of the project by deciding how many levels of leadership or management, or how many layers, how far they drill down into the organization. In some organizations, a team is only composed of senior managers. I would expand the team to ensure more diversity and more viewpoints. And this slide depicts those I think should be on your team. I think you need some backing from your senior management in order to ensure success. And even if the plan, even if the focus of your plan is not a top administrator, your health commissioner, your director, should at least shouldn't be expected to sit in all the meetings unless it is something that is a succession plan for a top administrator. But he should at least be updated regularly on the process, and I think by backing, I think it's more than your health commissioner, your director just giving a nice kickoff or pat on the back. They really need to be, a part of the process. And of course, management levels should be included, and hopefully these people you'll pick based on their effectiveness and their abilities, not necessarily their politics. Key area representatives. This is, for example, if your local health department has a large EPI program, you'll want EPIs or public health nurses or sanitarians. You'll want people like that represented on your team. And with all the technology changes going on, you'd probably do well to have an IT person. I think we all know that tech pretty much drives things these days. Also a good idea if you got some long-term employees, you should consider having these. They can bring some history and help help you avoid repeating mistakes, and they can usually be a good gauge of the culture of the health department. Human resources people, it's imperative you have them on there. They can get you the data that you need, and they're essential to the process. So. And also, depending on your culture and your governance, you may need to notify your union officials about what you're doing. And the ideal number, I think, in having a team is like 7 to 12. More than this, I think you have trouble getting a consensus, and fewer than this, you don't get the diverse opinions that you need. And I think this is pretty much how I think your team should be made up of. So, team member responsibilities. Not everyone invited to join the team will be willing to invest the time and effort that's needed. And you probably need to do something to try to discover this before getting too far along. And you may want to send out a list of job requirements. And as listed in my slide here, your prospective members, they should be available, attend at least 1-hour meetings each week. They should be willing to accept assignments and complete them within a reasonable period of time. They should be willing to talk to others in the health department about succession planning efforts, and also, it goes without saying, they should have approval from their supervisor to serve on the committee, on the team. So first of all, and Joanna and Marita have told me that all of you have a strategic plan. I'm sure that you have a budget plan too, and some of you may be working on a workforce development plan, which we know is a requirement of accreditation. And the goals and directions of each agency's or local health department strategic plan we know are different. you should review your strategic plan to identify current and future priorities. Hopefully those are in your strategic plans. And doing this should help you determine how staff should be distributed across divisions and units, and can help you define, what we call functional responsibilities. And I think understanding these priorities will help. Understanding these priorities, you'll be able to identify where retirements and general attrition will have the greatest impact on your local health department. If your strategic plan for some reason does not address these kind of issues, then you may want to consider doing a SWOT analysis focusing specifically on this. You're very fortunate if you have a strategic plan that relates directly to workforce planning, and in this case, the level and analysis of your succession plan should be at least at that level, or equivalent to that of your strategic plan. So next, let's talk about you've got your team together, and you're getting your strategic alignment, and now determining the scope. And that's one of the first things that your team needs to do. And you should ask these kind of questions: what part of the local health department, what positions will be addressed? How far ahead you want to plan? You're looking at 3 to 5 years. Are there any particular problem areas? And this essentially will help determine which types of assessments you need to perform. Determining the scope of succession planning is essentially deciding on how many levels of leadership or other key areas you want to include. And again, this is part of that whole drilling down part that I talked about earlier in the presentation. This will be easy for small local health departments. And the slide lists some of the questions your team will want to consider to help you determine your scope. And this is more a qualitative process, and if you're like me, I'm not as comfortable with that as quantitative. But the kind of questions are any reorganizations planned, or any functions changing or being consolidated, or anything services that you have being. Are you planning anything services to be discontinued? And once you have learned about your local health department as a whole, then you should focus your assessment on the key positions that you think are going to have the biggest effect on your local health department. So analyzing your workforce. So once you've identified your scope, a workforce analysis would be conducted, which can help you define your current and your future workforce, and how that's related to different management and other key positions that you're looking at. So the workforce analysis generally considers such information like job classifications and skills and experience and retirement eligibility, diversity, turnover rates, and that sort of thing. And I'm going to discuss some of the methods used to determine this, and these include supply, demand, and gap analysis. So the next few slides, we're going to briefly review some of the methods used to analyze an agency's workforce. So this slide, we're looking at demand analysis, and doing this will help you identify the future workforce needed to carry out your local health department's missions and goals, objectives. And this step focuses on the work your local health department needs to perform and the staff needed to perform that work. In this step, you should identify the current work functions. So we're talking about work functions being performed, and new and future functions that will need to be performed. And so you may also end up identifying some current functions that will not be necessary in the future because of changes in technology or different changes in responsibilities or in the different types of services that you provide. So this slide lists some of the questions that can be used to help determine the needs of your future staffing. And they include, as you can see, what can be done more effectively or efficiently, what skill sets will be needed to meet new strategic goals. Are there opportunities to reorganize? These are the different types of questions that can help you do that. Supply analysis focuses, on the other hand, on your local health department's current and future workforce supply. With this, it kind of answers the question, what is the profile of our current workforce and what does it need to be in the future to accomplish our goals and objectives? Okay, so we're working on workforce supply. The other, when we're looking at demand analysis, we're looking at functions. So once the functions that must be performed have been determined in your demand analysis, then you need to then identify the staffing that you need that are needed to perform these functions. So a supply analysis for a local health department can be conducted using current statistics and applying past attrition rates, looking at turnover and that sort of thing. So to determine the current supply of staff in specific positions and development opportunities available for those, you need to answer the questions that are in the slide. For example, how many employees are in the key positions in the local health department? What are current retirement eligibility statistics? What's the average time to fill vacancies? What are the attrition rates? So these are the questions that you're looking at when you're doing supply analysis. You also you're looking at trend data, workforce profile, hiring patterns, retirement patterns, turnover statistics. And with this, this next slide here, I did some work recently for a local health department, a smaller local health department. This is an example of some data that I collected through their HR that helped me give a big picture of the local health department, which indicates things like service time and roles, management versus non-management, and service lines. And I'm sure that many of you have these kinds of spreadsheets which can help you home in on your local health departments where you might want to focus your succession planning efforts. And HR can provide you with a lot of this type of data and help you to get your focus. I do want to note, though, when you're looking at service time, it's important to note it's not always the numbers here, it's not always a clear indicator of when an employee leaves an agency or retires, because service time usually doesn't include time worked from previous employment, whether it's private or public, and using age and service time together is probably a better indicator of how much time an employee will be with your agency. This slide, I'm sure you probably all have reports and spreadsheets with data like this. This is, again, some information that I collected working with the local health department, and this is the kind of information that your project team needs to be looking at in order to understand what your local health department looks like. So I'm just providing this to illustrate how some of this information can be presented, and again, this is some of the data that involves your current workforce demographics. Having attrition data might be useful for some of you. If you're a small health department, you probably don't have to do much analysis to figure out what your attrition rates are. But if you're a large local health department, or a lot of states do this, but if you're a large local health department with hundreds or even thousands of employees, which some of you have there in the area that we're of New York State that we're talking about, it could be helpful to learn about your attrition rates, and your HR people, again, can they have this, and it's calculated by, very simply, by adding the number of employees who left the agency and dividing by total number of employees. So the estimated attrition rates should be based on a number of the variables I've indicated, and these are the demographic variables in the slide. However, I think we all know that past attrition may not necessarily be an accurate predictor of future attrition, so we do need to keep that in mind. Gap analysis. So now we can take a few minutes to talk about gap analysis. And in succession planning, conducting a gap analysis uses a supply analysis and demand analysis. That's what we just, the information that we just collected, and we use this to identify the situations where current and future workforce needs are not very well matched. So this next slide provides some key questions to help you compare supply and demand to determine whether or not you have some gaps in your workforce. And some of these are like questions: how will trends in the public health environment affect the competencies and leaderships of the current workforce? And how will trends in the public health environment affect competencies and leadership of the current workforce? And so when gaps are identified and projected supply is less than projected, this would indicate a future shortage of needed workers or skills. So it's important to know what critical jobs will have gaps, so you can provide and you can plan the necessary training or recruiting that can be anticipated. This part of succession plan, I have to tell you, really requires some effort, takes some effort, and this is where you need to determine the extent of any gaps for each classification and competency set. Identify where, and then you need to identify where candidates will come from to fill these gaps. So please remember that, again, that succession planning in local health departments is relatively new. And once you implement it, it can take a few years before you see the benefits and impacts. And I think that is important for you to, again, keep in mind. I put this slide in here. This is just a simple method to use to illustrate the framework for thinking about attrition and how it affects workforce needs. For each key position, you identify where there is a gap, and the extent of that gap, and then you quantify the gap to the extent possible. So bridging the gap. Bridging the gap is where you identify and describe the gap and try to, and this is before before finding ways to remedy it. This is where I say the rubber hits the road and you identify factors responsible for the differences between your current and future performance. So gaps in workforce, in your workforce, can be defined in terms of grades and skills and experience and competencies, or some combination of these. But in attempting to identify skill gaps, it may be useful to think about focusing your attention on particular positions within sections or divisions that deliver essential services, which this is what we should be doing. So, job profiling. We all know that competencies are a set of behaviors that encompass skills, knowledge, and abilities. We all know these are called our SKAs. We use that acronym SKAs. And competencies help to determine or help define behaviors that contribute to successful performance in a particular position. And once you've narrowed down the list of key positions that need succession plans, then you'll want to obviously assess what competencies that are needed for each of these positions. So good, up-to-date job descriptions should incorporate the appropriate SKAs. I think you're probably all doing this, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir a bit, but the planning team needs to carefully review the responsibilities from the job descriptions when determining the competencies that are needed for each of these positions. It's also a good idea sometimes to interview incumbents in different positions. You know, people that have held those positions in the past, they can provide you some really good information about, you know, what the key responsibilities and what they think the competencies that will need it to fulfill be successful in those positions. And your HR people are also key in helping to incorporate those competencies into those job descriptions. So there is some work here. And a competency list, you should have one for each position, and generally there should be 5 to 9, and they're generally broken down into different categories, general and specific. Of course, the general are more everyone in an agency needs, you know, it's part of the organization's culture, and the specific competencies are those those are the things that need to be demonstrated for an individual doing a specific or particular type of job. We're really fortunate in public health to have the Council on Linkages, and I think you're all familiar with what they've done, the work they've done and continue to do, and I know they're doing some revisions, but they have established core competencies for public health professions. This is the guide we use for developing our workforce, public health workforce, and they represent the skills that are needed to practice public health, and they're a good starting point for local health departments to understand and assess and meet the training needs of people in those different positions that you're trying to develop and prepare for moving up the ladder. I think everyone understands the core competencies were designed with 3 different levels. You've got that Tier 1, the Tier 2, and Tier 3, and of course the Tier 1 competencies apply to public health professionals who do the day-to-day stuff and are not in management positions. And then your Tier 2, those apply to public health professionals with program and management responsibilities. And then, of course, Tier 3 are your senior level and leaders and organization leaders. We also know that the competencies are organized or categorized by 8 areas, and I'll talk about that a little bit in our next slide here that's coming up. And I understand that most of you are either familiar with or have even been trained using the Public Health Foundation's 3-step prioritization matrix. And I'm showing you the next 3 slides. I'm showing you these to let you know that these tools have multiple QI uses and can be used to help you with your succession planning. So those of you might not be that familiar with it, we're not going to get into any detail on this. I just want to let you know that these are tools that you can use, and if you need more information about these, you can visit the Public Health Foundation website for a step-to-step process on how to use them. This slide is step 1 of step 3 in the process, and this indicates the process, step 1, using the Public Health Foundation's radar chart. You can see that, again, there are about 80 competencies, and these are organized into those 8 domains or skill areas, and these are essentially what this is all about. Is these are competencies assessments that can help determine the level of knowledge and skill and can help you prioritize where learning and development needs to be focused. This slide just shows you the other two steps in the process, and again, I just wanted to let you know that these tools can also be used for succession planning, and I was glad to hear that you've had some training on them, and some of you had training on them, and some of you are familiar with them, and again, I would certainly encourage you to look closely at using these in your succession planning efforts. This next tool, because the reason I'm putting some of these tools on here, are part of, in the evaluation, some of you had requested that I provide you with some of this, of the information, some of the tools that are available. So so there are many tools out there, and this tool can aid in the discussion of employee strengths and development needs. And this one is called the 9-box grid. And how it works, real quickly, each employee is placed in the appropriate section of the grid. The rows signify the potential of an individual to be promoted. The columns signify whether the employee is meeting or exceeding the current role's expectation, and then an employee who is exceeding expectation in their current role has a high potential would be located in box 3, and then an employee who's below current expectation and has low potential would go to the bottom left in box A1. So this grid allows an agency to focus on employees of the upper right quadrant, again, for the purpose of succession planning. This is a sample of a readiness chart, and it's just another tool that some managers use to track the talent in the pipeline. I'm not sure if it has much utility for you, but it may be useful for some of you to look at. Individual development plans. I don't know if you're doing these. I'm assuming that you do, but if not, this is a very important component of succession planning. And, individual development plans or IDPs can be crafted to help narrow the gap. This is what you're trying to do, narrow the gap between the person's job requirements and their present performance and their future advancement, which helps them to know or be ready for that higher level or more difficult responsibility. So I think you are probably familiar with this, but I just want to remind you that this is a very important component of succession planning, and this includes mentoring and coaching and stretch assignments and so on and so forth. And this next slide is a sample of an individual development plan. Again, these can be developed for one's strengths and weakness. Once one's strengths and weaknesses have been identified, and they should be created to help individuals grow professionally, and these should be mutually developed by the supervisor and employee. So I'm going to talk more. These are the 3 strategies, and I'm going to talk more about this at the next session that's planned in January. And so once you get to this point, you essentially have 3 strategies to deal with. Of course, the overarching goal is to create a pool of well-qualified applicants who will be available when a vacancy occurs. So you've got some choices there, whether you fill them with internal employees who don't need much training, whether you go out do external recruitment, or whether you train and develop internal staff to succeed in when the vacancies occur. So you have these three strategies. The action plan, once you're, once you have your strategies about how you want to fill the gap, once this has been determined, then an action plan needs to be implemented, and an action plan has a sequence of steps, and this lists specific, you have specific tasks, what will be done and by whom, and then with a time horizon, you might want to use a Gantt chart, and then, looking at resources, what kind of funds are available for specific tasks. During our the first presentation, there was discussion about some of the challenges of working under a collective bargaining agreement and civil service rules, and these civil service rules and collective bargaining agreements can provide some challenges for succession planning, and I think I've seen collective bargaining agreements have been described as civil service on steroids. But I've done some reading, and I know that your state civil service administration understands the need for succession planning, and that's a really good thing. And they're trying to make this easier, and they've actually developed a guide that you can go online and access. And so you could develop your succession plan, when you're looking at issues with CBA and civil service, you could develop your succession plan where supervisors help employees recognize the training they need to pursue leadership opportunities, and then another strategy is to develop all employees who are direct reports to the position and also interested in participation. So, I mean, it's a little, it's a little different because you have some restrictions, but these are just some ideas that I've read about. Also, other strategies that might have potential are more related to position classification actions, and these include, streamlining job duties for more efficiency, modifying titles to improve new duties, creating new job titles, redesigning titles to accommodate new work patterns, and so these are just some of the thoughts, working under a CBA. But as far as setting work loads, work assignments, myself, we have a union here at the university, and we're also civil service. Our union is only a year old, and I'm having to, I know as a manager that I have certain management rights as far as establishing workloads and work assignments. So I'm not sure of all the specifics of your, each of your collective bargaining agreements are different and specific to your agencies, and I'd be willing to have discussions with you either online or through phone calls to talk about this and have a more deeper discussion if you're interested. Also, I thought that some of you may operate under very stringent civil service rules and collective bargaining agreements, and you may feel there's little room left for you to do succession planning, but actually I think there's always work that you can do in succession planning. You shouldn't feel like you're hamstrung. And these are some things that you can do on a more informal level. So, we do have a form of informal succession planning, and your civil rights requirements and your collective bargaining agreements should allow you to do some of these things to one degree or another. And again, I hope that you're working closely with your collective bargaining people, your union representatives, and I think you may be able to make some headway in getting some understanding of why it's important to have succession planning and why you need a little bit of structure when you're doing this. But again, this is an informal approach. So so one thing you can do is engage aspiring employees in conversations of substance. Give aspiring employees a broad range of technical assignments. Place aspiring employees in a variety of departments, giving them a broader experience. Urging aspiring employees to involve themselves in the profession, getting actively involved in professional associations and taking leadership positions in those associations and networking with people in those associations. Next slide, again, there are some these include more staff development strategies that can develop aspiring employees that feel when you feel hampered by the more formal rules governing your local health departments. And this encourages, you can encourage aspiring employees to complete an MPH. I'm not sure whether you have tuition reimbursement programs, but many universities actually have scholarships. We have scholarships that we provide for employees working in local health departments, and all of our courses are offered in the evening so employees can continue their work. You may want to create your own leadership academy or a management certificate program for aspiring employees. You may want to develop special assignments in various departments for potential successors. So again, this is kind of an informal approach. I hope that may give you some food for thought on moving ahead if you really feel hamstrung. Succession planning, this next slide, is a continuous process. And it's important to monitor your progress along the way. So you need to establish a schedule to assess your progress. Get feedback from your manager on how well things are going. Survey your employees on what they think. And you need to continue to modify and maintain succession planning as an ongoing process. So these are some of the references that you may access. If you have, and if you want to, if you need more information, always feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to help you. And I'd like to encourage you to stay tuned for part 3, which we have scheduled. This is succession planning for local health departments, an example of how to do it. And this is scheduled for January 15th next year, 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And at this time, I'll open it up for any discussion.
Thank you so much, Hans. This was a great presentation. And as a reminder, we're going to open up for discussion, and to ask a question, you can either type it in the chat box or you can raise your hand, and we'll just try and keep it orderly. That way, when you do have a question, you can unmute your line and ask it. And just so you know, the pod on the bottom right of your Adobe Connect screen where it says Files, you can download the slides right there. So if you do want to go back and look at any of the slides from the presentations or see the list of references, again, the slides are right there for you to download. So at this point, we'll open it up to questions.
At the end of this is Marita, at the end of our first webinar, we had suggestions that really encouraged us to ask Hans to make sure he left at least 10 minutes. So any questions at all that you have, again, where we only have 4 to 5 people on the line, please just feel free to unmute your line and speak up. Well, while I'm waiting for people, Hans, I'll tell you, it was interesting when you made the suggestion that you might want to ask people at this point in time what they do, what their current job responsibilities are. I thought it's so simple, but I can see how it could be potentially very helpful at this point if, again, a health commissioner or supervisor or manager or all, just asked people who work under them to take a day or so, think about what their primary job responsibilities are and their secondary job responsibilities are, and what they think are the key requirements to do their job. With that information on an individual level, I think it would be so helpful to see for the higher level, the leadership level, to see whether they agree with what people believe their primary and secondary responsibilities are, whether they agree with whether they agree with what the job requirements are, and it certainly would set the stage to start to think in the future. So that's a long-winded comment, but to me it was like light dawned, and I thought that was a very simple sort of way. So I throw that out there, and does anyone agree, disagree? Is this something that you think would be beneficial for you to do now if you just wanted to begin the process?
Marita, I'll just kind of chime in. I'm glad that you picked up on that. Sometimes we think that this whole process of succession planning is extremely complicated and intimidating, and sometimes, you know, getting this information, it's right in front of you, and some of our leaders, our supervisors, often don't know what their direct supports do, and sometimes it's very helpful to have a better understanding of what their direct reports are doing. So again, sometimes it's pretty simple. It's right there in front of you.
So Kathy, I'm going to pick on you, Percocello. Could you see doing something like that right now at Putnam? And if yes, how do you think it would be viewed?
You've reached the voicemail of Kathy Percocello. No, I'm only kidding, Marita.
I like that response.
Actually, we were having a sidebar conversation. So if you rephrase what you want me to answer, I would be happy to answer it.
What I was saying, Kathy, I'll try to be brief, but one of the suggestions Hans had on one of his slides is that one of the important ways to gather information on what are the important competencies, responsibilities of your workforce now, and thinking about that in terms of the future. He said one of the most straightforward ways is to ask people, what do you view as your major job responsibilities now, and your primary ones and your secondary ones, and what do you think are the job requirements for your job, and to gather that information at a higher level to see actually what people do view their jobs, and whether you agree or not, what they do view their requirements are. So it's kind of a non-threatening way to think about, well, is that going to be required in the future? So I was just saying, is that something that you could see doing at Putnam? I'm picking on you because you're a little health department, and then I was going to turn to either Dr. Tamarkin or Kalaine to answer the same question as representing really big health departments.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's something we could do. It actually would probably be pretty interesting to find out because, as Joanna knows, she had Barb and I on the phone, and we were looking at we went through the step one of the gap analysis for the workforce development, and interestingly, how we looked at how the staff saw what they thought they needed for training, and how the managers looked at staff and what we thought they needed for training, and it was a bit of a difference. So it would probably be very interesting to find out what do the staff see as their responsibilities. Yeah, I think that would be something interesting to find out.
Dr. Tamarkin, are you available to comment in terms of your health department and being a commissioner? Do you see any value in collecting that type of information in order to start thinking about what you would need 3 to 5 years out from now as people retire or resign or otherwise? Or Colleen, what do you think about New York City doing something like this?
I think it's definitely something that we should do, and I think that we've started to do it probably more in an informal way. We did the an IDP project with mid-level managers before. We had a MPH program for staff and continue to urge staff to pursue MPHs. We have a mentoring program. The goal of that is to develop junior staff to prepare them to fill senior roles. So I think we've addressed it in an informal way. I think HR would need to be involved in the conversation here. They have not attended any of the webinars, but I think they would definitely need to be a huge part of an undertaking like that for us.
Yeah. Sam, what do you think about in terms of Rockland? Uh-oh.
Okay, I'm going to change the discussion a little bit, and Hans, if you could just answer, because I didn't hear you mention this, how long, if you go through the whole process, how long would a typical succession planning initiative last, or how long would it take?
Well, it should actually be viewed as a ongoing part of the agency. It takes years to develop employees for leadership levels and key positions, and there's always changes in the environment, in public health, and there's always adjustments that need to be made to the plan. So the process never truly ends.
Like so many of them that the health departments are also dealing with.
Yes.
Or working on. So I have that we are actually after 2 o'clock now, so I'm going to ask that we end the webinar now. As we did before, if any other questions come up, we can certainly send them on to Hans, and he will address them in the next presentation. Again, this recording will be made available in our training catalog, and I'll send out an email announcement to everyone when it is up and running. And thank you so much, Dr. Schmalzried, for presenting to us again today. And just a reminder to register for the January 15th